Dan, Human Resources needs to see you right now. Those 6 words echoed across my office doorway on a Tuesday morning. My name is Daniel Miller. I am 47 years old, and in my 22 unbroken years with Apex Consumer Electronics, I had never been summoned to Human Resources. I was a career quality technician who climbed from an entry-level inspector at age 25 to senior quality assurance manager, overseeing 12 engineers. My reputation was built on precision, unyielding integrity, and catching manufacturing flaws long before consumer electronics reached store shelves. I looked up from my monitors, where I was analyzing thermal stress reports for our expansion line. My supervisor stood in the doorway, his face pale. "When do they want me?" I asked. "Right now," he replied flatly. "Dan, leave your laptop locked and head down to the 3rd floor immediately." A cold knot tightened in my stomach as I stepped out. Inappropriate behavior was alien to my life. I had been happily married to my wife, Laura, for 23 years. She worked exhausting night shifts as a head triage nurse at Regional Medical Center. We had 2 wonderful children depending on us. Chloe, 19, finishing her sophomore year in electrical engineering at State University, and Eli, 16, an ambitious high school junior preparing for college entrance exams. Everything I did was aimed at ensuring my family's financial security. Walking down the 3rd floor felt like marching toward an execution. Over 22 years, I had walked these corridors thousands of times, but as I approached the frosted glass doors of Human Resources, dread settled over me. Gwen Foster, our Human Resources manager, was waiting behind her mahogany desk. She was a woman in her mid-40s with a cold demeanor. "Sit down, Daniel," she said, her voice clipped. "We received an extremely serious complaint regarding your conduct during yesterday afternoon's project review meeting." I blinked hard, bewildered. My conduct? "Gwen." I presented our preliminary compliance metrics and yielded the floor. Instead of answering, Gwen slid a typed transcript across the desk. Portions were aggressively highlighted in bright yellow ink. "Read it yourself," she said, tapping a pen against her desk pad. I pulled the transcript closer, my hands trembling as my eyes skimmed highlighted passages. What I read made my stomach turn inside out. According to the document, I allegedly unleashed crude, sexually explicit remarks aimed directly at Victoria Vance, our recently promoted division director. The quoted language attributed to me was disgusting, unprofessional, and foreign to my character. "This is absolute fiction," I exclaimed, slamming the document back onto her desk. "I never said a single word of this. Every person in that boardroom knows I would never utter such nonsense." I barely spoke 3 sentences outside of my presentation. Gwen did not flinch. 3 separate senior attendees signed sworn internal incident statements claiming they heard you make these exact statements, Daniel, she asserted coldly. "They claim you made these comments during a 4-minute video feed interruption when the main conference system switched to the backup audio bridge." I stared at her in disbelief. "Check primary server recordings. We record every executive project review on cloud infrastructure for legal auditing." Her eyes hardened. Unfortunately, the primary recording file for that 4-minute segment suffered unrecoverable data corruption. The backup bridge was the only active stream, and these 3 witnesses documented your voice clearly. In that horrifying moment, the cruel reality crashed over me. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a carefully calculated corporate execution. 3 weeks earlier, I had raised red flags during our monthly divisional quality review, while auditing safety validation metrics for our new consumer electronics line, championed by Victoria Vance. I discovered critical safety data had been deliberately altered. Structural stress thresholds were artificially inflated, thermal dissipation failures hidden under modified baseline algorithms, and flammability hazard ratings massaged, just enough to scrape past minimum regulatory standards instead of meeting internal safeguards. When I brought these alarming discrepancies to Victoria Vance in her corner office, she gave me a thin smile and told me to be a team player and trust the process. When I refused to sign off on tampered validation certificates, subtle retaliation began. My name was omitted from operational emails. Projects I managed for years were quietly reassigned to junior staff. Departmental heads who used to stop by my office began avoiding eye contact. Victoria Vance worked under me as a junior quality associate 10 years ago. Back when Eli was in elementary school, I mentored her, taught her complex regulatory frameworks, and personally wrote the recommendation letter, securing her first supervisory role. I never imagined that a decade later, she would use corporate mechanics I taught her to construct a lethal trap designed to destroy my career and silence me permanently. Before I could voice another word of defense, the heavy oak door of the HR office swung open without a knock. Gwen snapped her head around, ready to reprimand the intruder, but words froze in her throat. Gerald Thorne, Chief Executive Officer of Apex Consumer Electronics, walked directly into the room. Tall and in his mid-50s, Gerald possessed an imposing physical presence and quiet authority dominating any space he occupied. "Sir," Gwen stammered, scrambling to her feet, "we are currently conducting an urgent disciplinary hearing regarding severe employee misconduct." "Actually, Gwen," Gerald interrupted, his deep voice calm and unbothered by her panic, "that is not why we are here today." Gwen went pale so fast I thought her knees would buckle. She made a hurried attempt to grab the fabricated harassment folder, but Gerald reached out and picked it up before her fingers touched paper. He opened the file, glanced at yellow highlights with quiet disdain, and pulled up a chair. He did not sit across from me. He pulled the chair directly alongside mine, sitting shoulder to shoulder with me facing Gwen. "Daniel Miller has been working directly under personal supervision of my office for the past month," Gerald stated firmly. "He is currently executing a confidential, board-authorized operational mandate." "What?" I blurted out, my head spinning. In 22 years at the company, I had spoken to Gerald Thorne perhaps 3 times in the elevator bay. Gwen looked like she had seen a ghost. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Thorne, I don't understand." "What mandate?" "You will understand very shortly," Gerald replied coolly. Then he turned to look at me directly, his blue eyes sharp and steady. "Dan, would you mind waiting outside in the hallway for a moment? And on your way out, please call Legal Director Evelyn Cross on your mobile phone and tell her that it is time to initiate Protocol 7 in Conference Room D. Tell her the board is ready." I stood up on unsteady legs, my mind reeling as I stepped out of the HR office and closed the door behind me. Through the frosted glass paneling, I could see silhouettes of the 2 people inside. Gerald Thorne was leaning forward over the desk, tapping his finger rhythmically against the surface, while Gwen Foster shrank back into her executive chair like a cornered animal. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my phone, but I dialed Evelyn Cross's direct line immediately. Evelyn answered on the first ring. "Daniel?" she asked, her tone crisp and devoid of surprise. "Mr. Thorne told me to call you," I said, trying to steady my breathing. "He said it's time to initiate Protocol 7 in Conference Room D." Finally, Evelyn replied without hesitation. "Head up to the executive 4th floor right now, Dan. I am already grabbing primary evidence binders. Meet me at Conference Room D in 3 minutes." The elevator ride up to the 4th floor felt surreal. When doors slid open, Evelyn Cross was already waiting in the hallway. She was a formidable corporate legal director in her late 50s, with sharp gray-streaked hair and a fierce reputation for protecting the company's legal integrity with absolute efficiency. She extended her hand, enveloping mine in a firm handshake that instantly grounded my scattered nerves. "Thank you for your courage, Dan," she said quietly, unlocking the mahogany door to Conference Room D and gesturing for me to step inside. The blinds overlooking the city skyline were drawn, plunging the room into twilight. A massive leather-bound binder sat in the center of the conference table, alongside an encrypted corporate laptop. I pulled out a chair and sat down, resting my forearms against the cool table surface. "Evelyn," I said, leaning forward, "I am completely bewildered. Less than 20 minutes ago, HR was preparing to summarily terminate my employment for fabricated sexual harassment against Victoria Vance. Then the chief executive officer walks in, claims I've been secretly reporting to him for a month, and orders you to launch Protocol 7. What is transpiring here?" Evelyn sat down directly across from me, opening the heavy binder and adjusting her reading glasses. "Let me ask you a question first, Dan. Over the past 4 months, outside of safety data discrepancies you flagged 3 weeks ago, what else have you observed within Victoria Vance's division that felt abnormal?" I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts. Besides being systematically frozen out of operational meetings and stripped of project oversight after I refused to sign off on tampered consumer electronics validation reports, I've noticed strange financial requisitions. High-value testing contracts being moved away from accredited third-party testing partners and handed to obscure private consulting firms. Expedited shipping budgets being approved for unreleased hardware, and a complete breakdown of standard quality audit logs. Evelyn nodded slowly, her expression darkening with grim satisfaction. That matches our forensic findings exactly, Dan. 4 months ago, our internal financial compliance software flagged abnormal capital disbursements originating from Victoria's division. Small, calculated amounts designed to avoid triggering executive review thresholds, but cumulatively totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. Gerald personally authorized me to launch a covert internal audit. She slid the binder toward me, revealing pages of bank statements, intercepted email chains, and digital forensic audit logs. My eyes scanned names listed as co-conspirators: Victoria Vance, her deputy operations manager Julian Price, and a mid-level QA compliance coordinator named Nora Albright. The records revealed a massive conspiracy. Victoria and her inner circle actively falsified product safety compliance reports, altering thermal overload parameters, and manipulating laboratory failure metrics to push a flawed consumer electronics line into mass production ahead of schedule. By bypassing mandatory re-engineering phases, Victoria attempted to secure a $2 million executive performance bonus. My throat went dry as I turned a page showing technical schematics I drew myself months ago. "But why target me with a fake harassment claim?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why go to such extreme lengths to destroy me?" "Because you were the one obstacle she couldn't buy, coerce, or compromise," Evelyn explained sternly. "When you refused to sign tampered compliance certificates 3 weeks ago and threatened to escalate safety failures to the board, you became an existential threat to her entire scheme. If you blew the whistle, her expansion project would be halted, her bonus would evaporate, and her fraudulent activities would be exposed to federal authorities." Evelyn leaned closer, pointing a manicured finger at a highlighted legal memo inside the folder. "Under statutory federal protections, specifically Title 18 United States Code Section 1513, retaliating against a corporate whistleblower who attempts to report regulatory fraud carries severe criminal penalties, including federal prison terms. Victoria knew she couldn't simply fire you for raising safety concerns without triggering an immediate legal investigation under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act under Title 29, United States Code Section 2101, and federal whistleblower statutes. She needed to destroy your credibility first," Evelyn continued, "by fabricating a severe personal misconduct charge involving crude sexual harassment. She created a pretext to terminate you for cause, invalidate your professional standing, and render any future safety warnings you made look like bitter fabrications of a disgraced ex-employee." The cold, calculating evil of their plot sent a shiver down my spine. At 47 years old, with 22 years of immaculate service, my entire life was wrapped up in this company. My $95,000 annual salary was the bedrock of my family's survival. We paid $28,000 a year in out-of-state tuition and housing for Chloe's electrical engineering degree. Eli was starting his senior year of high school in a few months, and college application fees and tuition deposits were looming. My wife Laura worked grueling 12-hour night shifts at the hospital, sacrificing sleep so we could maintain our modest mortgage and save for retirement. If Victoria's forged harassment charges had stuck, I would have been fired without severance, stripped of accrued retirement benefits, and blacklisted from the entire consumer electronics industry. Finding another senior QA management position with a black mark like sexual harassment on my record would have been impossible. My family would have faced financial ruin. "So where does Mr. Thorne fit into this?" I asked, looking up at Evelyn. "Why did he intervene today?" "Because 3 days ago, Gerald's personal forensic IT team successfully recovered uncorrupted server logs from yesterday's project review meeting," Evelyn revealed, a subtle smile touching her lips. "The audio glitch was not a system malfunction. Julian Price manually executed a local script to sever the main feed, allowing them to splice a synthetic, edited audio track into the backup bridge. But our IT team caught the digital fingerprint. Gerald saw the entire setup in real time. She pushed a crisp document across the table along with a silver fountain pen. This is a formal whistleblower protection and special investigative engagement agreement, Evelyn stated clearly. It provides you with absolute legal immunity, guarantees your employment protection under federal law, and formally appoints you as lead technical advisor to the board's special investigative panel. We need your technical expertise, your knowledge of QA validation protocols, and your formal sworn testimony to dismantle Victoria's operation once and for all. I looked at the document, then down at the silver pen in my hand. My mind flashed to my daughter Chloe, studying late into the night for engineering exams, trusting that her father was an honorable engineer who stood for truth. I thought of my son Eli, who looked up to me as his role model, and I thought of Laura coming home exhausted in her nurse scrubs after saving lives in the emergency room. I gripped the pen firmly and signed my name on the execution line. "What is our next move?" I asked quietly. Evelyn closed the binder with a thud. "Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, Victoria Vance is presenting her final expansion proposal to the full board of directors in Boardroom A. She thinks she has successfully neutralized you and cleared the path for project approval. She has no idea that Gerald has personally invited 3 special guests to attend that meeting." I did not sleep a single minute that night. I lay awake in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan and watching faint shadows shift across the wall. Beside me, Laura slept fitfully, exhausted from her night shift, but turning over every hour as if sensing immense tension radiating from my body. When the alarm clock on my nightstand finally clicked over to 6 o'clock in the morning, I sat up, rested my head in my hands, and took a long, deep breath. When Laura woke up at 6:30 and walked into the kitchen, she found me sitting at the table in my full suit, staring into a black mug of lukewarm coffee. She pulled her robe around her shoulders, walked over, and placed her warm hands gently on my shoulders. "Dan," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet concern. "You didn't sleep at all, did you? What happened at the office yesterday?" I pulled out a chair for her, took her hands in mine, and told her everything. I told her about the summons to HR, Gwen Foster's cold accusations, the forged harassment transcript, Victoria Vance's ruthless scheme to cover up dangerous product safety failures, and Gerald Thorne's dramatic intervention with legal director Evelyn Cross. Laura listened in complete silence, her eyes widening as the magnitude of corporate warfare unfolded. When I finished explaining the upcoming board confrontation, she sat back, shaking her head in utter disbelief. 22 years, she whispered, her voice trembling with anger. "You gave that company 22 years of your life. You built their quality standards from scratch. And that woman, the same Victoria Vance you mentored 10 years ago when Eli was just a little boy, tried to destroy our family just for a corporate bonus. Power changes people who lack a moral compass," I said quietly. She thought I was just an old, compliant manager who would shut up and take early retirement if threatened. She didn't think I would fight back. Laura leaned across the table, looking straight into my eyes with an intensity that made my chest swell with pride. "You make sure you finish this today, Dan. You stand up in that boardroom, you tell the truth, and you protect those consumers. We built our life on honesty, and no corporate viper is going to take that away from us." When I arrived at Apex Consumer Electronics at 8:30 that morning, the building felt noticeably different. The usual energetic morning chatter in the lobby was replaced by a strange, cautious hush. Employees were whispering in small clusters near elevators, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. Word had clearly begun to leak that something monumental was transpiring on the executive floor. As I walked into my QA department, my executive assistant, Deanna, a sharp, loyal woman who had managed my office schedules for 6 years, hurried toward me, holding a confidential file. "Dan," she whispered, leaning in close, "Victoria Vance's department has been locked out of primary testing servers since 7:30 this morning." Julian Price was seen arguing furiously with IT security in the hallway. "What is happening? Just stay at your desk today, Deanna, and keep our team focused on routine inspections," I advised her gently. Whatever happens upstairs today, our department's integrity remains untouched. At 9:45 a.m., my mobile phone vibrated in my suit pocket. It was a text message from Evelyn Cross. Conference Room D. Bring your secure tablet. The regulatory package is ready. I grabbed my encrypted corporate tablet and took the private executive elevator directly to the 4th floor. When I walked into Conference Room D, Gerald Thorne and Evelyn Cross were standing beside a high-speed data workstation, reviewing digitized technical documents. "Sit down, Dan," Gerald said, gesturing toward the screen. "We need you to perform one final technical verification before we walk into Boardroom A. Evelyn plugged a high-security hardware token into the workstation, unlocking a restricted partition within Victoria's division archives seized by corporate IT security at dawn. "Look at this folder, Dan," Evelyn said, opening a file labeled Market Risk Evaluation Matrix. I leaned closer to the monitor, and as my eyes scanned data columns, a cold wave of disgust washed over me. It was a detailed financial risk spreadsheet created by Victoria Vance and Julian Price. The document mapped out projected product safety failures for their unreleased consumer electronics line over a 3-year deployment window. The columns were categorized with clinical detachment, projected thermal overload incidents, estimated consumer burn injuries, probable residential property fires, and expected fatality claims. Right next to each catastrophic injury category were exact dollar figures representing estimated legal settlement payouts versus the financial cost of issuing a voluntary product recall or re-engineering internal circuit architecture. They calculated the monetary value of human lives against quarterly profit margins, I whispered, my voice trembling with outrage. They knew these units would catch fire under prolonged operation, and they chose to budget for lawsuits instead of fixing hardware. "This goes beyond corporate greed, Dan," Gerald declared, his eyes burning with intense fury. "This is willful, reckless criminal negligence. If these devices entered the market, innocent people could lose their lives in home fires." Furthermore, Evelyn added, pointing to a secondary folder, "Our forensic IP team discovered that Victoria illegally copied proprietary firmware modules protected under federal copyright laws under Title 17, United States Code Section 106, and breached third-party patent licensing agreements under Title 35, United States Code CHED Section 271 to bypass our internal software verification checks. She committed multiple federal offenses just to force this product past the deadline." Gerald checked his silver wristwatch. It was 9:55 a.m. He turned to face me, placing a strong hand on my shoulder. "Dan, in 5 minutes, Victoria Vance will stand at the head of the boardroom table and present her expansion proposal to 12 members of our board of directors. She believes she has successfully suppressed your safety reports and framed you for misconduct. She has no idea that seated at the end of that table will be 3 senior inspectors from the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the Electronics Testing Bureau, and Trade Regulatory Affairs." My heart began to hammer against my ribs, but fear was completely gone. It was replaced by a crystal-clear sense of duty. "I am ready, Mr. Thorne," I said firmly. "Let's go." At precisely 10 o'clock, heavy mahogany doors of Boardroom A swung open, and Gerald Thorne led our small group inside. The room was grand, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the downtown skyline, a 30-foot mahogany conference table, and high-backed leather chairs occupied by 12 distinguished members of the board of directors. At the far end of the room, standing confidently beside a presentation screen, was Victoria Vance. She was dressed in an expensive designer suit, holding a laser pointer and radiating an air of complete corporate triumph. Seated near the front row of guest chairs were her loyal accomplices, Deputy Operations Manager Julian Price and QA Compliance Coordinator Nora Albright. Both were smiling smugly, believing that their rival, the stubborn QA manager who refused to play ball, had been effectively destroyed in HR an hour earlier. Victoria did not even glance toward the door as we entered. To her, we were merely late arrivals taking secondary seating. "Thank you, members of the board," Victoria began, her voice smooth and perfectly modulated as she clicked her remote control to display a slide. "I am thrilled to present the final operational launch package for our flagship Asian consumer electronics expansion. As you can see from market projections, this hardware line represents a $65 million net revenue increase over the next 4 quarters alone. At the head of the table, Gordon Kingsley, a senior board member in his late 60s with sharp white hair, nodded approvingly. Excellent work, Victoria. What is the current status of our regulatory safety certifications and thermal compliance testing? We received an inquiry last week suggesting minor laboratory delays. Victoria smiled seamlessly, waving her hand dismissively. I am pleased to report that those minor inquiries were based on outdated preliminary data, Mr. Kingsley. Our internal quality assurance metrics confirmed complete regulatory compliance across all thermal, electrical, and structural safety parameters. We are actually 3 weeks ahead of schedule for full production deployment. I sat near the back of the room, my jaw tightening as I listened to her deliver fabricated lies to people charged with overseeing the company's legal integrity. Before we proceed with formal board vote to authorize capital deployment, Gerald Thorne's deep voice boomed across the boardroom as he stood up from his leather chair. I would like to formally introduce 3 special regulatory observers who joined our session today. Victoria's demeanor faltered for a fraction of a second. She turned her head toward the side table, where 3 impeccably dressed individuals had been sitting quietly taking detailed notes. Please welcome Ms. Patricia Morgan from the Consumer Product Safety Commission, Mr. Oliver Williams from the Electronics Testing Bureau, and Ms. Rebecca Johnson from Trade Regulatory Affairs. Gerald announced clearly. A visible shockwave rippled through the boardroom. Gordon Kingsley and other board members sat up straight, their expressions turning instantly serious. Victoria's face paled slightly, though she quickly forced a strained, professional smile back onto her lips. What a delightful surprise, Victoria offered, her voice cracking slightly. We always welcome federal regulatory oversight and transparency. Actually, Victoria, Evelyn Cross said, standing up from her seat beside Gerald and holding her encrypted tablet, I have been instructed by the Chief Executive Officer to present a supplemental evidentiary package regarding your division's compliance filings. Victoria's eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. I am in the middle of a formal board presentation, Evelyn. Any internal legal documentation can be reviewed during standard committee subsessions. With the board's explicit permission, Mr. Thorne has authorized me to override the presentation display immediately, Evelyn countered calmly. Evelyn tapped her tablet screen. Instantly, Victoria's polished profit projection slides vanished from the presentation screen. In their place appeared the terrifying image of the Market Risk Evaluation Matrix, the secret spreadsheet detailing projected consumer burn injuries, property fire estimates, and calculated fatality settlement budgets. A collective gasp echoed across the boardroom. Board members stood up from their chairs, leaning forward to stare at the screen in absolute horror. The 3 federal inspectors instantly began writing furiously in their official investigation ledgers. What is the meanings of this? Gordon Kingsley demanded, his voice shaking with fury as he pointed a trembling finger at the monitor. Is this a joke? This document, Evelyn declared, her voice echoing with legal authority, was retrieved directly from a hidden, restricted server partition managed exclusively by Victoria Vance and Julian Price. It details a deliberate, criminal strategy to bypass federal safety testing and release non-compliant consumer electronics into the public market, weighing potential human casualties against corporate profit margins. This is a complete fabrication, Victoria shrieked, her composed facade completely shattering as she slammed her laser pointer onto the mahogany table. Someone has tampered with those server files. This is a malicious cyber attack designed to sabotage my career. Digital metadata confirms absolute authenticity, Evelyn replied coldly, tapping another button on her tablet. As do sworn forensic statements provided late last night by your deputy manager, Julian Price, and your compliance coordinator, Nora Albright, both of whom surrendered encrypted communication logs under federal whistleblower cooperation agreements. Victoria whipped her head around toward Julian Price and Nora Albright. Julian dropped his head into his hands, unable to meet her gaze, while Nora stared blankly at the floor. The betrayal in the room was absolute, and now, Gerald announced, Turning toward the back of the boardroom, I call upon our senior quality assurance manager, Daniel Miller, to deliver his expert technical testimony. Every single head in the boardroom turned toward the back of the room as I stood up, buttoned my navy suit jacket, and walked steadily down the center aisle to the front of the mahogany table. I felt 47 years of life, 22 years of professional dedication, and the unwavering support of my wife Laura standing right behind me. Mr. Kingsley, members of the board, federal inspectors, I began, my voice clear and steady. My name is Daniel Miller. For 22 years, I have served as Senior Quality Assurance Manager for Apex Consumer Electronics. 3 weeks ago, during routine laboratory testing, my team identified severe thermal overload failures in expansion line hardware. Under high-voltage operation, internal power modules exceed safe operating temperatures by over 40%, posing an immediate structural fire hazard. I paused, looking directly into Victoria Vance's pale, trembling face. When I presented these lab failure reports to Division Director Vance, she explicitly ordered me to alter baseline safety algorithms and sign falsified compliance certificates. I continued. When I refused to compromise public safety, she initiated a systematic campaign of retaliation. Yesterday morning, I was summoned to Human Resources under a fabricated allegation of severe personal misconduct, a forged audio transcript designed to terminate my employment for cause, destroy my professional standing, and silence my regulatory warnings before this board meeting took place. Absolute silence filled the boardroom. The gravity of my words hung heavy in the air, backed by the undeniable weight of 22 years of flawless service. Gordon Kingsley turned his fierce gaze toward the 3 federal inspectors. Ms. Morgan, Mr. Williams, Ms. Johnson, based on what you have witnessed today, what is the stance of federal regulatory authorities? Ms. Patricia Morgan stood up from the side table, placing her official credential badge on the mahogany wood. Mr. Kingsley, based on forensic evidence, server metadata, and Mr. Miller's expert testimony, the Consumer Product Safety Commission is issuing an immediate federal freeze on all manufacturing and shipping of this hardware line under Title 18 United States Code Section 1001 for false statements to federal authorities. Furthermore, our legal department is initiating a formal criminal investigation into corporate retaliation under Title 18 United States Code. Section 1513. Security, Gerald Thorne called out firmly. The boardroom doors opened, and 4 uniformed corporate security officers entered the room. Escort Ms. Vance, Mr. Price, and Ms. Albright out of this building immediately, Gerald ordered. Their access credentials are revoked. Their personal items will be audited by legal counsel, and they are barred from corporate property permanently. Victoria Vance stood frozen as 2 security guards stepped up beside her. She turned her head and looked directly at me. The arrogant corporate climber was completely gone. In her eyes was nothing but pure terror and the realization that her career, her reputation, and her freedom had vanished. As security led her out of the room, board members burst into loud discussions. 2 weeks later, the dust began to settle. The story of thwarted safety fraud and the collapse of Victoria's division sent shockwaves through the consumer electronics industry. On a Friday afternoon, Gerald Thorne called me into his top-floor corner executive office. Evelyn Cross was sitting in a leather armchair beside his desk, holding a blue leather-bound folder. "Dan," Gerald said, walking around his desk and handing me a cup of coffee. "Last night, the board of directors voted unanimously to enact a sweeping structural reorganization. We are establishing an entirely new executive division, the Executive Vice Presidency of Quality Assurance and Federal Regulatory Compliance. This position carries independent authority, direct board reporting power, and absolute veto rights over any product line that fails safety standards." He paused, smiling warmly. "We want you to take the position, Dan, effective immediately." He opened the blue folder, revealing the formal executive contract. Financial terms exceeded anything Laura and I had imagined. The base salary was $145,000 a year, accompanied by executive stock options, a performance bonus package, and an enhanced executive pension plan.